The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the corrals when she realized she wasn't alone. 10 men formed a tight circle, their smiles crooked and their intentions laid bare in the low rumble of their voices. She backed away until the rough wood pressed against her spine. Her heart hammered, the wind carried the scent of trampled grass, and fear made everything seem distant. Until a thunderous sound split the silence. A horse appeared at the entrance, and upon it the widowed rancher, his eyes burning with a determination no one had ever seen. He dismounted, strode towards the group, and with an authority that came not from shouting but from character, ordered them to leave. The men retreated one by one, as if ripped from their own arrogance. There, in that dusty corral, began a story of protection, of healing, and of a love neither of them expected to find. Subscribe to the channel for heartwarming stories every day. Anita's little house barely held on the hillside. The planks groaned with the wind that swept down from the mountains, and the gaps let in the chill of dawn. She'd wake before sunrise, wrap her thin blanket around her shoulders, and start her day like any other, hauling water from the well, coaxing a fire from dry twigs, brewing the watery coffee that was all she had until she could sell her vegetables at the market. Her fingers were calloused from planting, harvesting, and washing other people's laundry in the river. Her thin frame bore the marks of hard years, but her face held a dignity that suffering couldn't erase. Anita was in her early 30s, but she seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime on her shoulders. She had no family. Her parents had died young, taken by fever, and she'd grown up bouncing from house to house, working for food and shelter. The town treated her with a mix of pity and suspicion, a single woman, poor, without a prominent family name. Some said she brought bad luck. Others simply ignored her, as if her poverty were contagious. Across the dirt road, where the hills opened into vast pastures, lay the Santo Antonio Ranch. Tomas woke at the same hour as Anita, but his silence had a different flavor. It was the silence of someone who had lost the will to talk. He walked the corrals, checked fences, fed the horses, supervised the hands, all with mechanical efficiency. He was 40, broad-shouldered, with strong hands that could fix anything. His hair was starting to gray at the temples. His face, weathered by the sun, rarely broke into a smile. It had been 3 years since Teresa had passed. Fever had taken her in less than a week, leaving him with a large, silent house, empty rooms, and a bed where he slept only on one side, as if still respecting her space. His employees respected him, his neighbors admired him, but no one truly knew him. Tomas had built walls around his heart, and he had no intention of tearing them down. That morning, he saddled his horse and rode down the road that cut through the property. He needed to check the fence of the south pasture where the cattle grazed. The sun hadn't truly warmed the air yet, and the scent of damp earth from the dew rose from the road. That was when he saw Anita for the first time. She walked along the roadside, a basket of greens balanced on her head, her thin body holding the weight with the practiced ease of someone who did it every day. Her faded dress swayed with her steady steps. Tomas slowed his horse to a trot, not quite knowing why. There was something about that solitary figure, her upright posture despite her weariness, the determination in each step that made him stop and watch for a moment before riding on. She didn't look back. That night, Anita returned from the market with an almost empty basket. She'd sold little. The money would barely be enough for the week's flour. She entered her small house, lit the oil lamp, and sat at the stained wooden table. She took out the blue cloth she kept in a tin box, the only pretty fabric she owned, a keepsake from her mother, and held it between her fingers. It was her symbol of hope. Whenever the world felt too heavy, she would touch that cloth and remember her mother's words. "Keep this, my daughter. One day you'll make something beautiful with it." She still didn't know what. At the Santo Antonio Ranch, Tomas sat on the porch with a mug of black coffee. The sky was starry, but he wasn't looking up. He stared into the darkness of the pastures, thinking of nothing and everything at the same time. Two parallel lives, separated by the short distance of a dirt road, still unaware that God was weaving in silence an unlikely encounter. The late afternoon arrived heavy that day. Anita had gone to gather firewood in the thicket near the abandoned corral on the border between the ranchland and the path leading to town. The place was secluded, surrounded by old posts and tall grass. She knew every tree, every rock. It was where she could find dry branches without needing to ask permission. She was tying the bundle when she heard voices. She raised her head and saw the men approaching. She recognized some of the faces, workers from neighboring ranches, idle men who usually drank at the local store. They came slowly, fanning out in a semicircle, blocking the exit. Anita's heart leaped. "Well, look who's here all alone," one of them said, a crooked smile on his sun-baked face. She dropped the firewood and backed away, feeling the fence press against her. 10 men, maybe more. Their voices were low, but their intentions were clear in the way they advanced, in the way their eyes roamed over her without shame. "What's the matter, girl? Gonna run?" Another laughed, taking another step. Anita clenched her fists. Fear rose in her throat, but she kept her head held high. She wouldn't scream, she wouldn't beg. If she was going to fall, she would fall on her feet. "Get out of my way," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. They laughed. "Hear that? The poor thing has a voice." The circle closed tighter. Then came the thunder. The gallop of a horse cut through the air like lightning. They all turned. Tomas appeared at the corral entrance, mounted on his sorrel, his silhouette stark against the orange dusk sky. He dismounted with a leap, his eyes fixed on the group with an intensity that killed the laughter on their lips. "Leave, now." His voice was low, but it carried an authority that didn't ask, it commanded. One of the men took a step forward, trying to maintain his bravado. "Don't get involved in this, Tomas. We were just—" "I said now." The silence that followed was heavy. Tomas didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. There was something in his stance. Shoulders firm, hands relaxed but ready, an unwavering gaze that disarmed any cheap bravado. The men exchanged glances. One spat on the ground, another muttered something low. But one by one, they began to retreat. They passed Tomas without meeting his eyes, some murmuring empty apologies, others simply fleeing the confrontation. When the last one disappeared down the road, Tomas turned to Anita. She was still leaning against the fence, trembling, but her head was held high. Her dark eyes shone, not with tears, but with a mixture of relief and shame she tried to hide. He didn't approach. He kept a respectful distance, as if he knew any sudden move might startle her more. "You all right?" he asked, his voice softer now. Anita nodded but couldn't speak. Her throat was tight. Tomas looked at the bundle of firewood on the ground, then at her. "I'll take you home." It wasn't a request. It was protection. She hesitated, but the fear still pulsed too strongly to refuse. She nodded again. He picked up the firewood, tied it to the horse, and offered his hand to help her mount. Anita looked at that large, calloused, steady hand, and for the first time in a long time, she felt she could trust. She climbed onto the back, her trembling fingers gripping his waist. The horse set off at a slow trot, crossing the dirt road as the sun dipped behind the hills. Neither of them spoke on the way, but something had changed. When they reached Anita's little house, Tomas dismounted, helped her down, and left the firewood by the door. She murmured an almost inaudible, "Thank you." He nodded and returned to his horse. Before mounting, he turned back one last time. "If you need anything, send word to the ranch." And he rode off, leaving Anita on the doorstep, her heart still racing and a strange sensation in her chest, something between gratitude, confusion, and a warmth she couldn't name. Anita didn't sleep that night. She sat at the table, wrapped in a thin blanket, watching the flickering flame of the oil lamp. Her hands still trembled when she remembered the confrontation, the voices, the twisted smiles. but the image that returned most often was different. Tomas, dismounting, the quiet authority with which he'd dispersed the men, the respectful way he'd kept his distance. She clutched the blue cloth between her fingers. She couldn't cling to this. Men like Tomas didn't look at women like her. And even if they did, the whole town would turn any gesture into poisonous gossip. She was already viewed with suspicion. She didn't need to give them more reason. When the sun rose, Anita got up, tied her hair back, and went to the garden. Work had always been her remedy for thoughts that led nowhere. At the Santo Antonio ranch, Tomas hadn't slept well either. He woke before his usual time, stepped out onto the porch and stared at the horizon where the sky was beginning to lighten. The image of Anita leaning against the fence, scared but dignified, wouldn't leave his mind. He knew that kind of courage. Teresa had been like that, strong even when the world conspired against her. But it wasn't Teresa he saw when he closed his eyes. It was another woman, a stranger he barely knew who had inexplicably stirred something he'd thought dead. Tomas gripped his coffee cup harder than necessary. He couldn't think like this. He shouldn't. But when the foreman asked what needed to be done that day, Tomas heard himself say, "I'll head over to Anita's place. Her chicken coop fence is falling down. I'll fix it." The foreman raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Anita was crouched in the garden when she heard the sound of hooves. She stood up, wiping her hands on her skirt, and saw Tomas dismounting with tools tied to his saddle. He didn't smile. He just nodded. "Morning. Came to fix the chicken coop fence?" Anita blinked, confused. "I didn't ask." "I know, but it needs it." She wanted to argue, to say she didn't need favors, that she already owed him too much from the night before. But the words caught in her throat. There was something in his expression, serious but not threatening, that unsettled her. "I'll make some coffee," she murmured, looking away. Tomas worked in silence. He replaced the rotten boards, reinforced the posts, drove each nail with the precision of someone doing it in their sleep. Anita watched him from the kitchen window, pretending to fuss. He was different from the men she knew. He didn't talk too much. He didn't intrude. He just took care of things, with an almost severe efficiency that paradoxically made her feel safe. When he finished, Tomas put away his tools and walked to the door. Anita came out with a steaming mug of coffee. "Thank you," she said, holding out the mug. He accepted it, took a sip, and handed it back. "If you need anything, just send word." "Why are you doing this?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Tomas met her gaze. His eyes were clear, tired, but honest. "Because it's the right thing to do." Simple as that. He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Anita with the empty mug in her hands and a confused heart. In the following days, he returned. Always with some excuse, fixing the roof, bringing flour, checking the well. Anita tried to refuse, but he didn't give her the space. He'd just show up, do what needed to be done, and leave. And with each visit, the walls they had both built began to crack, slowly, imperceptibly, but irreversibly, until the town started to notice. At the general store, the women whispered. In the town square, the men exchanged glances. "The widower and the poor woman. He's lost his mind. She must be taking advantage." The words reached Anita like knives. And afraid of harming him, she did the only thing she knew how. She closed her door. Tomas noticed the change the second time he knocked and got no answer. He saw smoke rising from the chimney, heard the sounds inside, but Anita didn't appear. He stood on the porch, holding the sack of flour he'd brought, feeling an uncomfortable tightness in his chest. He left the sack leaning against the door and walked away without a word. But he returned the next day and the day after, always leaving something. Cut firewood, a piece of dried meat, zucchini from the ranch garden. He never knocked. He'd just leave it there and go. Anita watched it all from a crack in the window, her heart aching. She wanted to open the door, to thank him, to explain. But the voices of the town echoed in her head. A lone woman attracting a rich widower. Gold digger. Shameless. She couldn't do that to him. Tomas had already suffered too much, but the loneliness weighed heavily. One morning, Anita woke up determined. She would thank him properly and ask him to stop. She took a basket, placed the loaves she'd baked the day before inside, and walked to the Santo Antonio ranch. The gate was open. She stepped inside slowly, feeling like an intruder. The big house stood at the back of the yard, surrounded by old trees and a somewhat neglected garden. Tomas was on the porch, mending a harness. When he looked up and saw her, he dropped everything and came down the steps. Anita. She held out the basket, not meeting his eyes. I brought this to thank you for everything. He took the basket, but didn't look away from her. You didn't have to. I know, but she took a deep breath. I need to ask you to stop coming. People are talking. I have to go. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Anita. But it was like God said, it's not over yet. But I'm scared. But we'll figure it out. And there, in the yard of the Santo Antonio ranch, with the morning sun illuminating the neglected garden, two broken hearts began to allow themselves to dream again. The change was subtle at first. Tomas started showing up in the evenings after work, bringing fresh milk or asking if she needed anything. Anita began leaving her door open, offering coffee, talking slowly like someone testing the strength of a bridge before crossing. They didn't touch on the subject of feelings, but their gestures said everything. The way he fixed things without being asked, the way she saved the best vegetables for him, the comfortable silence that settled between them. The town kept talking, but Anita started to realize that other people's opinions weighed less when Tomas was around. Then came the storm. 3 days of heavy, cold rain that turned the road into a muddy mess and left Anita's house even more vulnerable. The roof leaked, the cold seeped through the cracks, and she spent her nights wrapped in a damp blanket, shivering. On the 3rd day, she woke up with a fever. Her head felt heavy, her body ached, her throat burned. She tried to get up to light the fire, but her legs gave out. She fell, sitting on the bed, breathing with difficulty. Tomas knew something was wrong when she didn't appear at the window that morning. He saddled his horse and rode over, the fine rain soaking his hat. He knocked on the door, nothing. Anita? He lit the fire, heated water, wet clean cloths, and began to press them to her forehead and wrists, trying to bring down her temperature. He rode back to the ranch for medicine and dry blankets, then rushed back. For 2 days, Tomas didn't leave Anita's side. He slept sitting in the chair beside the bed, changed the cloths, forced her to drink warm broth, adjusted the blanket when she shivered. In her delirium, she murmured disconnected things, names of people he didn't know, pleas for forgiveness, low supplications. He would hold her hand and say, always in that same firm voice, "You're safe. I'm here." She watched his face, the lines around his eyes, his unshaven beard, the tired expression even in his sleep. And she felt a wave of tenderness so strong it almost hurt. "Tomas," she whispered. He woke instantly, blinking rapidly. "Are you okay?" "You stayed here the whole time." And in that silence, pierced by the morning light streaming through the window, something between them solidified, an unspoken promise, but as real as the ground beneath their feet. Anita improved little by little. Tomas continued to show up every day, now without excuses. He simply came, sat at the table, and talked while she sewed or prepared food. Sometimes they sat in silence, but it was a full silence, the kind that only exists between people who no longer need to fill every pause. The town, however, didn't rest. The gossip multiplied. They said Anita had bewitched the widower, that she was faking illness to trap him, that it was only a matter of time before he realized his mistake and kicked her out. One Sunday after church, 3 women cornered Anita in the town square. "Have you no shame?" snapped Donna Amelia, the oldest of them, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Anita stopped, the basket of vegetables hanging from her arm. "Excuse me, slandering an honest woman?" He walked toward the group, and people instinctively moved aside. "Anita works harder than anyone here. She owes no one anything, and if anyone has something to say about her, they'll say it to my face. And if that bothers people, that's their problem, not mine." Anita took a step forward, then another, until she stood beside him. Tomas picked up the basket, placed it on the horse, and helped her mount. He mounted behind her, slid an arm around her waist with protective firmness, and rode off, leaving the town square in shocked silence. On the ride, Anita couldn't stop trembling. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "I did. Now they'll talk even more. Let them. Why are you risking so much for me? And I won't let this town or anyone else hurt you." Not because they had declared themselves. That had already been clear in the silence, in the gestures, in the late nights. But because now there was no turning back. They had chosen each other publicly before the entire town, and the town did not forgive. A week later, the inspector arrived. He was a thin man in a dark suit and round glasses who appeared at the farm in a rented buggy. He introduced himself as Dr. Augusto, sent by the county to investigate reports of inappropriate conduct. "And you've been seen in public displaying intimacy." The man adjusted his glasses. "You understand that without a marital bond, this raises moral and legal questions. More severe measures." She saw his expression and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" "But if we get married, they can't touch you. You become my wife. You have legal protection, you have a name, you have—" "No." She shook her head, her eyes welling up. "Not like this." "What do you mean?" "I don't want you to marry me out of obligation." Her voice came out louder than she intended. "I don't want to be another burden in your life, another responsibility you take on because it's the right thing." "Anita, you've already lost so much, Tomas. You deserve to choose freely, not be forced by an unjust law and a spiteful town. What if you regret it? Impossible. But they knew they needed witnesses, preferably people who could attest before the inspector that this was real. Father Estevan was the first person they approached. He was an older man with white hair who had known Tomas since he was a boy. He listened to the story carefully, nodding slowly. "You will face resistance," he said after a long silence. "There are people in this town who will not accept this easily." "I know," Tomas replied, "but I'm not asking for permission." The priest smiled, tired but understanding. "I wasn't asking, I was just warning you." He stood up, picked up the registry book. "I will perform the wedding, and I will testify before anyone who needs to hear it that Anita is a worthy woman and that you love each other." The doctor listened, asked a few questions, and at the end wrote a letter attesting that Anita was under his care, that she was an honest person, and that any accusation of vagrancy was absurd. "Give this to the inspector," he said, sealing the envelope. "And if you need anything else, call me." "I came to apologize," she said, cutting straight to the chase. "I was one of the ones who talked, and I was wrong. You don't deserve what this town did to you, and Thomas is a good man. If he chose you, it's because he saw what the rest of us refused to see." Meanwhile, Anita prepared the only nice dress she owned. She took the blue fabric, the one her mother had left her, and sewed a sash onto the waist of the simple dress. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers, and it represented hope. The day before the wedding, Thomas went to Anita's house and found her sitting at her table, sewing by the lamplight. "May I come in?" "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm nervous," she admitted, "but ready. And tomorrow, before God and whoever wants to see, I'm going to marry you, not out of obligation, because I love you." Anita dressed alone, adjusted the blue sash at her waist, and pinned her hair with a simple comb. When she looked in the cracked mirror, she barely recognized the woman she saw. There was fear in her eyes, but also hope. Thomas waited for her at the church entrance, dressed in the dark suit he'd worn to Teresa's funeral. But this time, his face carried no grief. It carried promise. Father Michael conducted the ceremony simply and sincerely. There were few people present. Dr. Mendez, Mrs. Peterson, some farmhands, and a few curious onlookers who were more interested in gossip later than celebrating. But Thomas and Anita saw no one but each other. When the priest asked if Thomas accepted Anita as his wife, he answered with a firm voice. And as they turned to leave the church, they found Sheriff Adams, the county inspector, standing at the door. Anita's heart turned cold. "Mr. Thomas," the inspector said, adjusting his glasses, "I need a word. They say you're being manipulated by Mendez's affidavit, confirming Anita's character. Here is Father Michael's letter, testifying that the marriage is legitimate. And here," he pulled out another paper, "is the deed to the house where Anita lived, which has now been transferred to my name. She is my wife, she has legal protection, and if anyone tries to touch her, they'll have to answer to me." Finally, he sighed, put the papers away and closed his briefcase. "Everything is in order. You just judged, because it's easier to judge than to see. I've worked my whole life. I've never asked anyone for anything, and when Thomas offered me help, I accepted. Not because I wanted to take advantage, but because I was tired of being alone in a world that only knows how to point fingers." Thomas took Anita's hand, interlacing their fingers, and looked at the crowd. "Does anyone else have anything to say?" Anita moved to Stonebrook Farm, bringing only the trunk with her clothes, the blue fabric, and the tin box where she kept her mother's few keepsakes. The big house intimidated her at first. The rooms were many, the furniture heavy, the silences long. But Thomas had a patient way of guiding her, showing her where everything was, explaining the routine, making it clear that this space was now hers as much as his. "You can change whatever you want," he said one afternoon, as she looked at the empty room that had once been Teresa's sewing room. "I want you to feel at home." Little by little, Anita began to leave her mark on the farm. She planted herbs in the neglected garden, sewed curtains from scraps, and started baking bread every morning, and the aroma filled the house, breathing life into rooms that had only held memories. Tomas watched it all with a mix of enchantment and gratitude. He'd come home from his work out in the fields to find the table set, dinner ready, the lamp lit. And most importantly, he'd find Anita, waiting for him with a smile that warmed him more than any fire. One evening, sitting on the porch after dinner, she asked, "Do you miss her?" Tomas knew immediately who she meant. "I do," he answered, honest, "but not in the way you might think. It's not a painful missing, it's a peaceful remembrance, like recalling something good that's past." Anita nodded, her eyes fixed on the stars. "I was afraid of being a shadow." "Of you comparing me?" He turned to her, taking her hand. "You're no one's shadow, Anita. You're your own light." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "And you're my miracle." And one morning, Anita woke with a different feeling, nausea, dizziness, and something more, a suspicion that made her heart race. She waited 2 weeks to be sure. Then, on a sunny afternoon, she called Thomas to the porch. "I need to tell you something." He dropped his hat, worried. "What is it?" She held his hands, her eyes shining. "We're going to have a baby." The world stopped. Tomas stood frozen, processing the words. Then slowly, a huge smile spread across his face, the kind of smile she'd never seen before. "Really?" She laughed, tears welling up. "Really?" He pulled her into a tight hug, spinning her around on the porch, laughing, a loose, free laugh, full of life. "We're going to have a baby," he shouted to the sky, to the hills, to the whole world. And Anita, laughing and crying in his arms, knew she had finally found what she'd searched for her whole life. A home, not a place, but a person. 6 months later, the farm was transformed. The garden bloomed, the house smelled of fresh bread every morning, and in the room that had once been a storage space, Tomas had built a crib with his own hands. Anita had sewn a blanket from her mother's blue cloth, the piece she'd held onto for so long, waiting for the right moment to use it. Now it would be the first thing her child would see upon entering the world. On the porch at dusk, Tomas sat beside Anita, his hand resting on her belly, feeling the baby's kicks. "What are we going to name them?" he asked. "If it's a girl, Teresa, to honor her." Tomas felt his eyes sting. "And if it's a boy?" "Raphael, because God healed us." He kissed her forehead, his heart overflowing. "I love you. I love you too." And there, under the sky painted orange and purple, with the wind carrying the scent of damp earth and the promise of good rain, they remained, no longer two broken people, but one heart mended by providence. Because sometimes God turns the most frightening moment into a doorway to healing. And life, weaving silently, delivers love exactly where there seemed to be no way out. Now it is home. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in their place? Comment and share with someone special.